Hi, I'm attorney Andrew Thomas. Welcome to the Deposition. Here today again with our attorney Blake Allen.
Hey, everybody.
How are you, sir?
I'm doing great.
Awesome. Well, let's get into it. So first I want to kind of touch on immigration court a little bit. We get those questions a lot. It's obviously a big part of your practice, a big part of my practice and what we do here at the firm. I think what people are a little confused on are what types of relief are available. There's obviously not just one avenue. When people find themselves in immigration court, they may have just entered the country. It may be somebody who's been here for 20 years, and all of a sudden we know that workplace raids are going on. We know simple things like there was a big story about a young lady blowing a stop sign, and she gets picked up. She's been here for a long time. I mean, those things can happen.
Yeah, absolutely.
And when these people find themselves in immigration court, depending on their time here and their ties to the U.S., they're going to inevitably have different forms of relief. You know, I'm bringing this up because congratulations, sir. We know you won a very big case recently.
Well, thank you. Yeah, so like you were talking about, specifically that case you're talking about where you're here for the United States for more than 10 years and have certain ties to the country is called a 42B application. Recently, I did win a 42B application for two parents here in the United States, and now both of them are well on their way to getting their green cards.
That's great. So, we use the term 42B. That's the number of the form. The longer form is called cancellation of removal because essentially that's what they're doing.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Canceling their deportation process. And then if you are granted this, you're on the pathway to residency, getting a green card. And really it all hinges on this particular application and what they call hardship.
Yeah, absolutely. So oftentimes that is the focus of the trial. What U.S. citizens or permanent residents are going to be harmed by your removal for the country. In this particular case, they had 5 U.S. citizen children, and 3 of them did have health concerns that may not have been adequately addressed in their home country.
One unique thing about this case, and I've been an attorney for 20 years, and I have not seen this, is you found both parents in court together, both seeking this cancellation of removal. That's a unique set of circumstances. So I found that very interesting.
Yeah, that was the first time I've ever come across it. And the judge in charge of the case, he's been a judge for years, and he said this was the first time he's ever seen 2 of those applications together at the same time, which I think did help our clients in being able to show the judge that the severe harm that these children would have if both of their parents were removed from the country.
Amazing. Well, right on, sir. Good job.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I'm glad that we were able to get them on the path to being here legally with their children.
Absolutely. So let's go into a broader base. So today, we hear, and I don't know when people are watching this, but, today being Thursday, May the 15th, there we go. The Supreme Court is actually hearing some pretty important arguments that touch on not only immigration, but the Constitution. We know that President Trump, when he came into office, issued a series of executive orders, this one concerning the 14th Amendment and what they call birthright citizenship. Yes. His executive order intending to clarify that of who and more likely who not would qualify under birthright citizenship. It almost immediately got an injunction from a lower district court, meaning it could not be enforced. Yep. And now that's been appealed all the way up. So we do know this is in front of the Supreme Court today. The actual merits of the 14th Amendment and executive order is not really what's being argued today. What's being argued today is, can the district court issue that injunction? I think that's pretty important, though.
Yeah, because if the Supreme Court says that the district court can't issue a universal injunction, that means in states where this isn't being sued over or states that aren't a party to one of these suits, the Trump administration could theoretically attempt to enforce a ban on birthright citizenship in those states.
Which is kind of wild if you think about it, because obviously the Constitution is a federal document that covers all U.S. jurisdictions, right? And so you're saying now to selectively enforce it across different jurisdictions.
Exactly. So we would end up with a patchwork system on how to give citizenship to children across the United States. I personally don't know how that's workable, but that's the argument that the Trump administration is currently articulating to the Supreme Court.
Seems like a little bit of an uphill battle they're facing there.
I think so, and just reviewing some of the arguments previously made, the justices are very concerned with the amount of lawsuits that this would end up bringing if you have to sue in each individual state, or even worse, each individual instance of a child not being given citizenship upon their birth in the country.
Wild times we're living in.
It very much is, and I have a feeling on which way this one's going to go, just from a pure judicial workflow perspective. But obviously, this is not a ruling on the merits of the case itself.
That will likely find its way back to the Supreme Court at some point.
Yeah, without a doubt. I think it almost has to be.
Unless Congress miraculously comes together and passes something, which...
So it's going to the Supreme Court.
There we go. It's safe to say. So next, let's move into, it's May. It's getting hot out.
Yep.
Summertime, travel plans. A lot of things are going on. We know that earlier this month, what went into effect is something called the Real ID Act.
Mm-hmm.
There was a lot of talk about this for, honestly, a couple of years before it went into effect, about after May 7th, 2025, which we're well past, people are going to have to start using what's called a Real ID. So these are, there's like a little designation on a driver's license, a little star. I mean, I know in California it was a bear with a star. Here in Texas, it's just that star, different color. So every state's got this designation, and you have to have this Real ID.
Yep.
You could travel before with an unexpired passport.
Yep.
You can still travel with an unexpired passport.
Yep. Nothing on that has changed.
I don't know how much effect this is really having.
I think that there are a few states like Oklahoma where if you didn't want a Real ID, you could request a non-Real ID compliant driver's license. If you are somebody in one of those states that gave you an out, maybe it impacts you if you don't have a passport. Mm-hmm. But otherwise, most states are Real ID Act compliant. This has been on the books since 2005, and it's only just now being enforced. So states have had well over a decade to be almost 2 decades at this point to be prepared for this moment, and I think most are. The one thing that might impact our clients and may be concerned about is, can you travel on your federal government provided work permit? Mm-hmm. That, according to the TSA, is still Real ID Act compliant. So if you're flying domestically with a work permit as your ID, you are still fine.
Which makes sense, because obviously it's a federally issued document. It's got a photo, it's got a date of birth, it's got a lot of personal information. It does scan. I don't see why it wouldn't be.
Exactly.
But...
So for most people, I don't think this will have an impact at this point. If you're from one of the select states, which I believe is somewhere around a dozen, that gave you an out, just have an unexpired passport and you'll be fine. Or just go change your driver's license to a Real ID Act compliant one.
Sure. And let's be clear here. We're talking domestic travel.
Absolutely. This is solely domestic travel. You are going to need a passport to fly internationally.
Let me go to Gabe Gutierrez now, because another significant headline when it comes to the president's immigration positions, with the Trump administration rolling out this new program today, cash for people who voluntarily self-deport, essentially. Walk us through what this means.
So next, let's talk about, there's been a lot of news stories out there, particularly, being disseminated by the Trump administration and various media outlets about so-called self-deportation, mm-hmm. where people that are in the United States that don't have status, they're being highly encouraged to leave the country, whether that's reporting it through the new CBP Home app, formerly CBP One, reporting your own self-deportation and leaving. Various benefits have been thrown out there, promises, or if you want to call them that somehow immigration is going to be easier for you in the future if you do self-deport. A lot of these things that we see out there in the news. The issue and the problem I see here is that while those things are being promised, what's really true? What real benefits are new as opposed to have been in existence at all times?
Theoretically, at the moment, not much, because there has been no guidance put out by any federal organization that they're actually going to be more lenient if you self-deport. Mm-hmm. You can still be subject to the 10-year bar, the permanent bar, for adjusting your status to get status in the United States if you do leave the country. So there's not really a lot of benefit. The only one that's been thrown out, and this was by Trump's border czar, Tom Homan, mm-hmm. He did say that they would be trialing a program to pay for your plane flight to leave the country back to your home country, and to get $1,000 upon landing in the country and reporting to the U.S. Embassy that you had returned to your country. Unfortunately, there is no actual federal funding mechanism for that, and also we just don't have any evidence that that's occurring at the moment.
So even if it was there, a lot of red tape.
Exactly. So you may do it and then still get nothing.
Right. So being clear, people do when they have entered this country without a visa, or let's say they overstay a visa, or they're here without authorization, they do likely have what's called an immigration ban on them. So if you're trying for residency, sometimes you qualify for a waiver to get those things removed. If you leave the country, you likely have a 10-year at a minimum ban, meaning you have to wait for 10 years before you can then file a waiver to apply for readmission. Yep. Nothing's really changed there. So if they decided to now be the good person, be the good, to report their self-deportation and leave, they likely still have that 10-year ban.
Yeah, and ultimately to fix that, you need Congress to fix it. And they're in the current environment, the current government, I don't see a more lenient change happening, or if it does, I will be very surprised.
Well, the Constitution is clear, and that, of course, is the supreme law of the land, that the privilege of the writ of habeas corpus can be suspended in a time of invasion.
Habeas corpus, something we learned in law school.
And then most attorneys probably forget about.
So it literally means to produce the body. And it is a legal function where someone has to actually present someone being held for charges.
Yes.
This has been thrown out recently that I believe particularly by Stephen Miller, that they were interested in suspending habeas corpus, which is a pretty radical act.
Yeah, that is a act that the federal government has only taken in a handful of occasions in our history.
I'd say the most famous time, if any history buffs out there, was we know Abraham Lincoln did this exact same thing during the U.S. Civil War, and he was called to task on it, but he did it. But again, Civil War.
And to this day, it's still one of the black marks on his presidency.
Absolutely. So we know that that's been thrown out there. How likely do you think it is that they're going to be successful in suspending habeas corpus under the current conditions?
I really don't see how they're going to do it. The judicial branch, I don't think, would countenance that with the current situation we're under. There's no actual invasion of the country. The situation is much different from the multiple times that it's been attempted to be enacted in the past. I just don't think it's likely.
So take it with a grain of salt?
A very large grain of salt, considering it's still somebody close to the president saying it, but a grain of salt nevertheless.
In the meantime, the Trump administration welcomed a group of 59 white South Africans as refugees, prompting some serious blowback from immigration advocates. Fox News Chief Washington correspondent Mike Emanuel has more from D.C.
Let me see the order or something.
As President Trump's immigration crackdown continues,
Welcome to the United States of America.
the administration rolled out the red carpet for 59 white South Africans they call refugees, saying they faced racial discrimination back home.
So obviously the news story with several families from South Africa, Afrikaners being resettled in the United States. And I see a lot of misinformation out there, differences between refugees and people seeking asylum. There's obviously quite a difference there. But
yeah. So a big first difference is asylum has to be applied for in the United States. To apply for refugee status, it's done outside of the United States. Also, all of your background checks, interviews, etc., are all handled outside of the United States at the U.S. Embassy or consulate that you've applied at.
So essentially, a refugee is approved before they land in the U.S. or come into the U.S. and someone seeking asylum, they're here awaiting a disposition of what's going to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. So the situations are similar insofar as you're a foreign national applying for residency in the United States due to persecution in your home country, but where that's determined and some of the other more obscure procedures are different.
So we had a question that somebody had advanced parole. They actually used it, which is a travel document. They actually used it to travel. They re-entered the United States. They're married to a U.S. citizen. And now his question is he safe to now process for residency?
Yeah, absolutely. You've re-entered the United States with the permission of the U.S. government that allows you access to adjust your status here in the country. So there's absolutely no bar to you going through with your application.
File that AOS. So we get a lot of questions about people that are at risk of being detained or being put into immigration court or even being deported.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what advice would you give to somebody who doesn't have status in the country?
Kind of depends where you're at. If you're in immigration court, get an application in. If you qualify for an application, and hire an attorney. That an attorney is the best way to navigate these times because those are people, those are experts. Those are people who've been there, done that, and they're going to be able to help guide you through any process you're going through.
And I want to have this tip out there. I think that I don't think I know if you're in the presence of the police or ICE or any federal authority, you're under no obligation to speak to them. You're under no obligation to sign things they present to you. Advice goes for people that are being investigated for a criminal activity. Same for immigration. It doesn't always help your case to actually be speaking.
Absolutely, because anything you say, as you've seen in the TV shows, can and will be used against you, and that includes immigration.
So help your lawyer out and zip it up.
Please.
So it's graduation season, so congrats to everybody graduating out there. But, in our field of work, we get a lot of questions as if somebody graduates and they don't necessarily have status in the country and they're ready to go get that work permit, can they do it?
Unfortunately, you can't. Getting a bachelor's degree or other advanced degree or even a high school diploma, as good as that is, and I do encourage all of you to keep up your education, that does not provide a route to being able to get a work permit or permanent status in the United States.
I think an important part about the work permit to understand is in immigration, you're generally getting a work permit because you have another process in play. And they're allowing this work permit while you're either waiting for this process or towards the tail end of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And just quite frankly, engaging with the U.S. education system isn't one of those processes.
Thanks for everybody stopping by here on the Deposition. Thanks, Blake, for being here.
Always happy to be here.
All right. Send your questions to us. We'll see you guys next time.